Who is more powerful? An 8,000-year-old elf of the highest order who has seen the light of the two trees in Valinor, or the creation of Eru-Ilúvatar before time itself? Today, join me as I explore this question and compare Galadriel to Gandalf, in not only a character analysis in which we'll discover their origins and greatest strengths, but also a fight to the death where we'll determine once and for all who is more powerful. My name is Gibby and welcome to Fact or Fantasy, a channel in which we explore awesome franchises like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and analyze the deeper lore behind the worlds we love. I know it might sound sacrilegious to pit Galadriel and Gandalf against each other, but I figured this is a question you'd ask your buddies after hour 9 of a Lord of the Rings movie marathon. It's not all that serious, but it will be educational and help us better understand the unique powers, history, and abilities of these iconic characters in Tolkien's world. We'll be diving into 3 categories of strength and ranking them as we go into each character's background today. Those categories will be mental, physical, and magical-based strengths. And ultimately, whether this is a close call or a landslide, the final decision will be up to you. So watch until the end and let me know in the comments who you think is more powerful. And now with that being said, let's kick things off by diving into each character's origins and lore. That way we have a better grasp on things as we move through their strengths. Galadriel is one of the highest and eldest of her kind. During the years of the trees, she was born of the house of Finarfin in Eldamar, and was the daughter of 2 kingdoms essentially, with her mother being a princess of the Teleri and her father being a prince of the Noldor. Growing up, she was a match for both the lore masters and the athletes of the Eldar, as she was not only wise and scholarly, but also much larger than most of the other elves. In fact, you might be surprised to learn that Galadriel was 6'4", or 193 centimeters. Another key feature of Galadriel's was, of course, her hair. Due to her parents' distinct hair colors, Galadriel's became a mix of golden and silver, coincidentally the colors of the 2 trees of Valinor, Telperion and Lorelin. It was said amongst the other elves that her hair directly took on the light of these trees, and at one point her uncle Feanor asked for a cut of her hair. She declined, and this is part of what makes Gimli's request so special in the Fellowship of the Ring. From a young age, Galadriel seemed to possess the inherent ability to perceive thoughts and the intentions of others. I don't know if mind reading is the right word, but that's the closest thing we have in our language to describing her power, which was not because of the ring that she later bore. No, this power was already in her. As for why she came to Middle-earth, that is a much longer story which I won't dive into today. But to summarize, she was a part of the exile of the Noldor and crossed the Helcaraxe with Fingolfin to reach Beleriand. Now let's press pause on that for now, as this video isn't about learning every piece of Galadriel's very deep lore, but what we've covered so far is a good foundation to build on. Let's switch gears and rewind to a time even before Galadriel and discuss Gandalf's origin. Gandalf's backstory is much simpler than Galadriel's, and that is because most of it is undocumented. What we do know is that he is a Maya, essentially angels of Eru-Ilúvatar, who were made before time itself and before the creation of the world. Each Maya typically followed the way of one or more of the Valar, and were like angelic servants to these godlike beings. Gandalf was mostly associated with Nienna and Varda, learning pity and patience from Nienna and light and fire from Varda. While Galadriel is about 8,000 years old, Gandalf is around 55,000 years old, but only existed in Middle-earth for about 2,000 years. It is key to note that his Maya version is named Olorin, and distinctly different from his physical form. The physical versions of these Maiar were called Istari, and there were only 5 sent to Middle-earth: Gandalf, Radagast, the 2 blue wizards, and Saruman. Their purpose was to fight the darkness of Sauron, hence why Gandalf leaves once his task is completed. A unique thing about Olorin is that he would spend time with the elves, either invisible to them or disguised as an elf himself. He actually put thoughts into the hearts of elves and cared deeply for them. Some theories suggest that this is why Galadriel likes Gandalf so much, as she might have sensed that he was Olorin, despite the fact that their identities were hidden when arriving in Middle-earth. It is possible, but I don't think Tolkien ever clearly states whether or not Galadriel recognized Gandalf. She simply trusted and liked him more than Saruman, who she questioned from the beginning. In fact, during the formation of the White Council, Galadriel wanted Gandalf to lead, but he did not accept the position. Saruman ended up being chosen afterwards and always seemed to resent them for all voting for Gandalf being the leader instead of him. But anyway, that's a bit of a side tangent. Back to the point of this video, I want to dive into these 3 categories of strength now that we understand the basic history and lore of our 2 heroes. So let's kick things off by going over our first category of mental strength. When comparing Galadriel to Gandalf's mental strength, things get tough. This is a category in which both excel. Galadriel can read minds, and Gandalf literally bolsters the confidence and courage of those around him. So, in order to better understand their individual mental strength, let's take a look at 3 prime examples for each of them. Starting with Galadriel, the first example that comes to mind regarding her own mental fortitude is the fact that she shut out Sauron himself. After Frodo's experience seeing Sauron in the Mirror of Galadriel, this is what she says to him. "I know what it was that last you saw," she said, "for that is also in my mind. Do not be afraid, but do not think that only by singing amid the trees, nor even by the slender arrows of elven bows, is this land of Lothlorien maintained and defended against its enemy. I say to you, Frodo, that even as I speak to you, I perceive the Dark Lord and know his mind, or all of his mind that concerns the elves. And he gropes ever to see me and my thought, but still the door is closed." This is one of the most profound moments we get of Galadriel's limited involvement in the Fellowship of the Ring, and it says a lot about her own strength mentally, as she is able to shut out Sauron, who is a Maya himself, just like Gandalf. The second example of Galadriel's mental strength would be the key moment right after that quote in the book, as she passes the test of the ring. This is huge and says a lot about her self-control and willpower. We learn early on in Galadriel's story that she was prideful in certain ways and did desire to lead. She was far from the perfect elf, and that's part of the reason she found herself in Middle-earth. This passing of the test signifies her ability to not only resist Sauron, but also resist her own desires and instead do what is best for the world as a whole. Lastly, Galadriel's third example of mental strength goes beyond perseverance and fortitude and into her ability to see through Saruman in the White Council. Like I mentioned earlier, she wanted Gandalf to lead, seeing him as the wisest of them all. And later in the books, Saruman says that Galadriel never did trust him. This point is almost a cross between mental and magical strength, but for now we'll toss it in the mental category. And overall, I'd give Galadriel a solid 9 out of 10 for this section. Now moving on to Gandalf, there are many examples I could use to describe his mental strength, but here are the 3 that stick out the most. First, he was specifically chosen to be sent to Middle-earth because of his humility and resistance to power. The Valar knew that Olorin would be difficult, if not impossible, to corrupt. That alone speaks volumes about his fortitude. Second, we know that he is sharper than he originally appears as things progress, and we find out that the entire story of Middle-earth is essentially orchestrated by Gandalf's hidden hand. This says a lot about not only his fortitude, but his strategic thinking and nature. After all, everywhere they go, each people group seems to have their own name for Gandalf, as at one point or another he has visited with them and given them his nuggets of wisdom. Third, just like Galadriel, Gandalf declines the ring, saying that if he took it, he would then become no better than Sauron himself. Once again, this goes back to the first example of him being picked for his humility, but this is that quality in action. Gandalf had many chances to take the ring, either by coercion or force, but he never did. That requires a very strong will, and therefore, Gandalf earns himself a 10 out of 10 in the mental strength category. Next, we have physical strength, and this is another difficult category. On one hand, Galadriel is more physically gifted naturally, as Gandalf is stuck in his old man body. Just like a man, Gandalf had to eat, poop, and sleep. He also aged, although he never died. But while it might be easy to say that Galadriel would easily best Gandalf in a physical contest, we have a few moments which make me think otherwise. For example, while Galadriel was mainly known for symbolic power and her magic, Gandalf experienced some pretty physical things during the War of the Ring. The most obvious example of this would be Gandalf's fall with the Balrog. He literally fought from the bottom to the top of the mountain. While he was doing that, Galadriel was making some lembas and rope in Lorien. All in all, I have to give Galadriel an 8 out of 10 for her physical strength and Gandalf a 9 out of 10. The only reason he isn't a 10 out of 10 is because he is heavily constrained due to his physical human form. Next, we can move into the category everyone has been waiting for, and that would be magical power. Starting with Galadriel, let's look at the two most obvious examples of her magical abilities. By the way, I do want to clarify that I know magic isn't the same to the elves as it is to us. Frodo and Sam learn this in Lorien, and it's a lot more subtle than throwing a fireball or something like that. Tolkien's magic was more so built on nature and spirituality. But anyway, Galadriel's first example of what I would call magic is her ability to read minds, which, as we said earlier, is separate from the ring. Perhaps it is bolstered by the ring, but Tolkien is quite clear that she could perceive thoughts before she ever obtained the ring. One of the best examples we have of this ability is when the Fellowship visit her and she tests each of them individually, offering them what they most desired and seeing how they would react, and if they would abandon Frodo and the mission. This implies she has greater control than just reading minds, as she can communicate with people on a two-way channel of sorts, not just one way. In addition to this inherent power, Galadriel has her ring, Nenya. Nenya is known as the White Ring or the Ring of Adamant. Nenya's power was preservation and the concealment from evil, which Galadriel successfully used to guard her land. Plus, like most rings of power, it just generally bolstered the bearer's natural qualities. So her strong nature became even stronger. All in all, on the magical power scale, Galadriel gets a solid 8.5 out of 10. The reality is that she has some insane abilities, but her magic is still quite subtle. As for Gandalf, he is an interesting case due to his two personalities. We have Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. For the sake of this video, we're going to look at both the Grey and the White, taking a peek at magical moments for each of them. First, I think a good place to look is Gandalf the White's encounter with Saruman after the Ents attack Isengard. Gandalf not only resists Saruman's voice, but also breaks his staff. The whole fireball bit in the movie is made up, so I don't count that. But this moment really shows Gandalf's divine power, which is pretty close to what Tolkien would consider magic. Also, a more obvious moment would be when Gandalf rides out and saves Faramir and his men on the Pelennor fields as they run back to Minas Tirith. When looking at Gandalf the Grey, we have some more outright magical moments. In The Hobbit, he lights fire to some pine cones and starts a forest fire, which could be contributed to him or his ring. I'm not exactly sure which, but that doesn't matter because Gandalf the Grey actually has a different warg encounter, which includes a much more amazing magical moment. You see, while the Fellowship camped out before heading to Moria, they were attacked by wargs. And unlike The Hobbit, Gandalf handles it a lot more swiftly and in a much more epic manner. This unfortunately never made it onto film, but here's what we read in the book. In the wavering firelight, Gandalf seemed suddenly to grow. He rose up, a great menacing shape like the monument of some ancient king of stone set upon a hill. Stooping like a cloud, he lifted a burning branch and strode to meet the wolves. They gave back before him. High in the air, he tossed the blazing brand. It flared with a sudden white radiance like lightning, and his voice rolled like thunder. Insert language I can't pronounce, he cried. There was a roar and a crackle, and the tree above him burst into a leaf and bloom of blinding flame. The fire leapt from treetop to treetop. The whole hill was crowned with dazzling light. The swords and knives of the defenders shone and flickered. The last arrow of Legolas kindled in the air as it flew and plunged burning into the heart of a great wolf chieftain. All the others fled. I love this moment, and I wish it was in the film. Besides the Balrog, it's easily one of Gandalf's coolest fighting moments, and it displays some epic magic. Now, before we finish things up and do our final tally, we of course have to mention Narya, Gandalf's Ring of Power. The ring was given to Gandalf by Círdan the Shipwright, who saw that Gandalf was someone of greatness, perhaps even perceiving his origin as a Maya. The ring itself is known as the Ring of Fire, and I have a whole video about it on my channel if you want to learn more. I'm not sure how much it contributes to what we would call magic, as most of its power is in bolstering the hearts of men and those around him. It almost had the ability to give confidence and strength to the people Gandalf was with, which is why he was so good at gathering men and leading them. He literally had the superpower of overconfidence. So anyway, between the ring and the magical moments I mentioned, I can confidently give Gandalf the Grey or the White a 9 out of 10 in magical strength. Which means that as this is our last category, I guess I would say that Gandalf wins this fight, but by slim margins. The important consideration here is that Gandalf is in his physical Istari form, not his spirit form as an eternal demigod of sorts. If he was in his Maya form, then of course he wins by a landslide. But in physical form, it is a close call, and by no means is he sweeping the floor with Galadriel. However, at the end of the day, Gandalf's abilities and strengths outweigh the Lady of the Woods. But hey, that's just me. What do you think about this matchup? Who would win in your opinion based on what we've discussed today and what you know about these characters' deeper lore? If you want to hear more about one or both of these characters, let me know in the comments and perhaps I'll do a deeper dive just focusing on their individual stories for a video. As I mentioned earlier, especially with Galadriel, there's much more that could be said that we couldn't get to today. Also, if you like this video format of who's more powerful, let me know in the comments who you think we should compare next. Aragorn versus Boromir, Gimli versus Thorin, Bilbo versus Sam. The possibilities are endless. Just a reminder, next week we won't have a video because I'm on vacation, but hey, if you're watching this later than June of 2025, that won't matter. As always, shout out to Jason, Cody, and the rest of my amazing patrons who support the channel and make these videos possible. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.